Okay, rulers, settle down. Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get singles for all your Force of Will and other trading card games, as well as these amazing patrons. Special thanks to guest lecturer member Vite Ramen. Thank you for your support. Class is in session. Hey there, rulers. Welcome back after a long week of Force of Will, but we know you probably have some questions, and you've come to the right place. It's Office Hours, your favorite ever live Force of Will podcast featuring myself, DMO73, and I'm joined, as always, by the beautiful Mike Rance.
Ahoy, mateys!
Who's apparently now a pirate, and the lovely Paul Reisman.
Mike Rance is the hottest pirate.
There you go. He's got that. He's got the beard. He's got that beard. Before we get started, I do want to say a few things to quickly go through it. First off, if you haven't already seen, Odyssey Games currently has pre-orders up for the 7th. The next set, it is available right now. You can click the link down below to go check out their website and click on the Force of Will part. You get pre-orders for both boxes and pre-release kits. Both are still available, and they have a larger stock than they even did for the past set, mainly because you all have been so great in pre-ordering through them. So check that out. Also, if you feel like supporting us and enjoy what we're doing here, you consider clicking that join button down below to become a Ruler School member and pick up your itinerary here at Ruler School. It is the way to give financial support to the channel other than just watching. You also help us unlock things like the new Brad emote. As you can see, we're 25 members away from that. And you get access to things like the GP live streams, the names in our Discords, like badges in our Discords, private rooms, deck profile doctoring, feature matches, everything else like that, as well as all the beautiful emotes that will now surely be spammed in the chat by people who are watching. So if you want to give us that support, we'd appreciate it. Otherwise, we're just glad you're here and enjoying the show. Whew, that was a lot. But, guys, guess who gets to go to a locals for the first time in over a year this week?
Is it those guys?
It's us! Although Paul's been going to a Wanderer's
to Odyssey.
Locals. Yeah, to Odyssey. For over a year.
Hi, Dan. Love you.
We're very excited about it. We figured this would be a great time as we're starting to see more and more places trying to open back up safely or things like that to talk about this idea of what it means to build a locals, what it kind of means to kind of start script from fresh, what it means to try to regather the troops, and just some things to kind of note, tips and tricks, as well as how we are a tier 2 game, and so building a locals is a different experience than working towards the locals for the big 3 that we have seen people stumble on in the past or get disheartened by. And so we want to try to give some of the things we've experienced or some recommendations, as well as answer your questions to make that experience as easy and successful for you as possible. Ooh, is there a leak of what the playmat looks like that comes with the pre-release kit? Adam Rassett. Yes, it's the 6. You can check it out on the Force of Will website, fowtcg. It's the 6 Fallen Angel rulers. Their card art there. That's what that looks like. So, and the pre-release promo is our buddy Wolfgang, who we saw being able to the white-blue Wolfgang resonator. So, yeah. Also, I do want to say welcome to Leviathan Shade X and Starlight Masquerade. Good to see you guys back here as well. So,
welcome.
Yeah, always glad to see new people and returning people, which is always great. So, let's talk about locals. Mike, I'm going to actually start with you because you have a wonderful kind of example of what part of what being a Force of Will ambassador at a locals is like. Mike, what are you doing back there?
I'm building the 9th New Frontiers legal deck that I'm going to use to get people involved in the game and also potentially fire off an 8-man tournament if possible.
Yeah, so tell me about what that process is like. Like, why is that something that you're pursuing towards building a locals? And kind of what do those decks look like for you when you're trying to do that?
So most of the time when it comes to those decks, I'll build something like a little bit complex for myself to make myself like the boss battle character. I have trampled over people and turned them into eternal rivals at my locals, in all fun, because people bring their friends in, people I already know, and they're like, hey, this guy's going to Worlds, you should totally play against him. They're like, guy's going to Worlds, he can't be that good. And then they don't know how to play the decks that I give them, and I know the decks inside and out because I've spent 3 hours putting together like 5 decks because I have boxes and boxes full of cardboard that needs to kind of get put together into 40 card piles. And well, it's not too bad, honestly. It's a lot of fun building the decks ahead of time because I get to think kind of thematically. You really want to build decks that accentuate what your ruler does, not just kind of, like build something like this is the best deck ever. Every deck, I have 20 copies of Prisia, 20 copies of Lycion, and 20 copies of Melfi. I've got all 5 of my decks ready to go. It's going to be great. Most of the time, it's just like, all right, let's not think about it like that. Let's think about it like, all right, I'm putting together Lilius. If I'm putting together Lilius, I'll be like, all right, so a couple of Percivals to showcase the draw power aspect of the deck, a couple of Hoyle Pigs, because, Hoyle Pigs, and then show people that, not only was there stuff in that set, but also stuff in the new set, like the Sylvia Resonator I'm putting into the deck. So you just kind of get like this little smorgasbord of stuff. And then you just put together a bunch of funsies stuff. I put together the Magna Healing Gimmick FTK deck, which is not good, but it's very funny to kind of show people and be like, so this is what you can kind of do in this game. Just a quick heads up for you guys.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think I think that you hit on this element of that you're building decks differently than what you would expect to see, right? So obviously the best way to be able to teach someone the game is the demo decks, specifically the new Rhea Helsing Elves versus Vampires demo decks that were released with the new formatting. They're actually really solid for like learning the basic mechanics of the game. They're driven in such a way that you get to experience what chants are, what resonators are, what additions are, the experience of how good it can feel to flip a J ruler but not be crazy. It introduces you to some of the basic ideas of green and black, like some color identity elements. So like those are really good, and those are really
color
good ways.
identity just do for green.
Yeah, ramp.
That one. Okay, cool.
The ramp element of green.
Okay, they picked that one. That's cool.
Yeah, that's the element they picked for green. So it gives you some of that element, but also like the game feels very structured. It feels very, intentionally driven towards just learning and understanding the mechanics of the game, which is really great. If you can't have that, the idea of what Mike is talking about in terms of building unique decks that are driven by the ruler, and then just like turn the dial down on them a little bit in terms of complexity, in terms of how far you want to push.
The Ragnarok deck is literally just a pile of 40 cards that kind of interact with each other. There's a Mikage Rhea, a Power True Power, and a Griffin in there. That's the only 3 synergies we have, aside from Burning Rabbit Dash and Ragnarok's ability to copy it.
Yeah. So like it's this idea of that you're wanting to show people truly, or give people the opportunity to truly see like the essence of a deck without showing them like the peak version of that deck, right? Because part of the fun in Force of Will can be experimenting and learning what the peak of that is and playing it, but someone who's never played before isn't gonna want to do that. Like, I mean, certainly there are some people who are like, just give me the best, I want to net deck the best. We've seen that from some players who are just like, I'm learning based off the top tiered list of the last GP, right? But if you're trying to get new fresh faces in, you want it to be built towards experience versus build towards like skill. And I think that's a pretty big distinction. And a good way to kind of talk about that is it's not just in New Frontiers format. Like Mike is obviously building towards New Frontiers, but the beauty of that, which is kind of naturally pushed that way, is by the idea of approaching Wanderer, especially if you have a community that has a lot of older cards or that's just what's available. And to speak to that, I do kind of want to talk to Paul, who's been playing at a Wanderer locals for the past few weeks, and you've broken 10 people, mostly new faces, pretty much every week. So kind of talk about what that experience has been like for you, or what you've seen, or how you've approached that idea of the Wanderer environment.
Yeah, so y'all know Dan of ccgprime.com, the store.
Love that
fame. So his thing was, Dan. So he had just a ton of product, and so he opened his own store recently, and it's a Force of Will store. Like, he's running Magic and other stuff too to draw other players in, but it is first and primarily a Force of Will store. So what that means is he has this huge collection of cards to be able to sell to people. And I mean, this is all listed in his article on forcewilllibrary.com. That's FOW library.com. And his whole approach is basically just give everybody cards and then play a format where they can use those cards. And the thing is, we have such a huge catalog of cards. We have almost, 8 years of cards at this point?
Pretty close.
7 full years pretty soon. There's just tons and tons of stuff. I mean, people are just like buying stuff off the shelves. I see people buying at least 2 or 3 products at a time when I'm there. Last week, I was able to talk to somebody who was like, "Oh, this game looks really interesting. What's going on here?" Because they wanted to play in the event, and he grabbed the Melgus Varia structure decks from way back in Alice Cluster. And I just said, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of control players here today, so you're going to want to play Melgus and just focus on doing aggressive stuff. And he's like, all right, well, I'll buy 2 of this. And he played in the event, and he seemed to have a really good time. I think what's really good about Wanderer is it just gives such a low barrier to entry. You can literally just pick up a structure deck and say, all right, I'm going to try this. I'm just going to enter the tournament for a few bucks and just see what I get. And then what happens is everyone gets a pack. Just everyone gets one. I went X3 unexpectedly my last local, and I still got a pack, and I got like 4 or 5 promos because that's just what Dan's got stored up. So I guess the best thing I can say is if you want to start playing Wanderer at your locals to kind of just get people into the product, you can say like, if this seems really interesting to you, this is like $25 box. Just grab a couple of those and see what you can make. And I guess what I'm doing, because I have pretty much all the cards that I need, is I'm just going back to the older clusters and I'm just bringing those older rulers forward, those things that I think are going to be fun, and put up a good fight. So like I played Stealth last week and just got trounced because Stealth is weird right now. But it was still fun. Like people were like, "Oh my god, this mechanic is so cool!" Like you just don't see that kind of stuff in the newer sets, and so people were like blown away by like how cool the mechanics were. And so it just sort of captures their imagination to see older cards doing cool stuff. So that's my best advice. Just go for Wanderer. Tell people what the cheapest product is that they can find. Have them get that stuff and have them create their own deck. A lot of times you're going to see Magic players come in, either pick up Foul on the side or just completely move it out, move it in place of Magic in and of itself. I've seen Yu-Gi-Oh players do that. Yeah,
absolutely. You know,
all my streams of consciousness there for you.
Perfect. Yeah. So to answer Brandon, you guys have already kind of hit it in the chat, but for Brandon Hill, you're trying to introduce new players to the game, but I recommend using New Frontiers Legals cards or cards from older formats like Lapis Cluster. It is very driven, like Mike said, by your locals. If your locals supports the idea of just like what Paul is saying of play whatever, then like Wanderer has the natural lowest barrier of entry because older products you can get a lot of it for very, very cheap. So that gives you the opportunity to give that player the most sprawling experience of Force of Will for the most money. Like you can get like 4 or 5 different archetypes and decks for the same amount that it would cost you for maybe 2 in current New Frontiers format in terms of like box prices and sealed product and stuff like that. If your locals are New Frontiers driven, don't teach them about Wanderer. Say that like, hey, we have an Eternal format, but like work with them and encourage them in the New Frontiers era. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit about there's more to it. It being an ambassador for a game at a store, there's more to it than just playing games or just being available or being willing to talk to people. And I think that that's something that people need to kind of understand, or we've seen that's kind of the point where we've seen drop off. And I think the 3 of us have really experienced what it means to go that one step further. And how you make that rewarding, and also like how you set up your expectations appropriately so you don't get burned out by it.
Something important also to mention, if your locals is playing fairly casually, like if you're trying to gather locals and not really like fire tournaments immediately, Even if you have players that are looking for New Frontiers, but some people's come in and say, "Hey, I've got older cards. Can I still play?" Play your New Frontiers deck against their Wanderer deck. I've got somebody in my locals who has like a thematic Snow White werewolves deck, and it's so much fun. It reminds me of like 2014 era Force of Will, and I'm like, all right, this is fun. This is a nice little nostalgia trip. My decks aren't so busted that they're just going to trounce you. I'm going to play a tempo deck. I'm going to play something that'll go kind of toe to toe. The cards aren't that great because they're early Grim Cluster cards. They're lower in terms of their power level for the most part. But she still has a good time and still just goes playing decks. And occasionally I'll just go, "Hey, I'm going to do this little combo on you." She says, "No, you got the combo." And then it makes a rival an enemy for life. And that's what the Seeker does. If you're an intermediate to advanced force, be the bad guy a little bit. Don't be an asshole about it, but just be kind of like, be the aspirational group.
Yeah, I think there's an element, and so this is a nice little transition to kind of like what it means to be an ambassador at your store versus a player, because that is two completely different like roles to fill. So like it's important to make that distinction and know that that's something that you want to do. Because if you are a player and that's what you want to be, and you're trying to do things that an ambassador is doing, you're going to have this weird identity crisis because you're going to get caught in situations where you're not really going to be sure, or you feel like it's not going to be as much as in it, or the reward isn't going to be there as much, and so you're going to get burned out. So the first is this idea, like Mike said, is set yourself up to be comfortable going X3. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, your win record means nothing as the ambassador player, right? Your job is to be a liaison of the game for the community, which means that you play fun stuff. It means that you, like, again, take the competitive, like, say I built a Violet deck, for instance, for this coming Wednesday when we're just doing a locals hangout. I am playing 4 copies of the Fairy, 3 copies of the Burning Robot, 2 copies of Healing Robot, not a 0 copies of Heart to Heart. Only I've taken the deck's efficiency and I was like, no, and I've turned it down, right? So your natural deck building is going to shift, because you wanna again, it's not about winning, it's about like having a game, and so your deck building needs to kind of reflect that, and you need to be okay with that because that deck is going to look different than you would normally think. But at the end, it's also needing to be a deck that you can say, like, if you're playing with someone and someone who's new, you play against them with it. They say, "That's cool." Hand them the deck to try. Make it a deck. Make it a deck that, like. So that's kind of step 2, is bring multiple decks, so that if someone gets interested in something you're playing, you can go, "Why don't you give it a try?" And you just like hand it over the table.
Another important thing about bringing multiple decks, and kind of one of the most fun things that I've had for the bait and switch. You play against somebody, you kind of indoctrinate them into the game by playing a deck that is less powerful than theirs, something that they can go toe-to-toe with, but you know that they'll come out on top. And then you say, "How do you feel with this deck?" And they'll be like, "This feels great. I had my first win." I'm like, "All right, cool. Do you want to play against my real deck?" And then you bring out whatever you're bringing out, and they're like, "This is where I can go from here? This is the ceiling?" And I'm like, "This is near the ceiling."
This is not.
And they're just like...
Yeah,
and then you get them. And then you get the wheels turning.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I love being the villain. I love being the gym leader. You know how in the Pokemon Generations thing, you see Brock go over to like this table and he pulls out 2 Pokeballs, but he's got another set of 6, so he's got like levels of Pokemon that he has for trainers coming in.
I'm so with you right now.
That's me. That's what I want to be. I want to be the gym leader.
Yeah. And so there's also
this should be appropriate for your level.
So there's also an
level 12. I see. Understandable.
There's also an element of adapting your play style to be very different as well, because again, what your goal of the game is, your goal isn't to win. Your goal is to help someone hook them, right? They're playing a game to win. They're playing a game to try it. They're playing a game to win. You are not playing that same game as them. Your job is you win by making sure that person has a good experience. As such, your play lines are going to look different. And that's something that takes practice, that takes like mental acuity to again understand that the end of results of this is you might have done your job and lost. And you
Yep.
need to be okay with that. And certain people aren't, right? Which is okay. You know, no one's telling you that you have to be that person, but it's an understanding that you can get more reward out of it if you recognize that and you're okay with it. Because it can be very rewarding for a new player. It can be very rewarding as the advocate to play against a new player, know that you're slow rolling them, but like do it in a way that seems, you know, you're not lying, but also at the same time you're like not making it obvious. Like you're hooking them, right? That's the whole point. It could be very.
You don't want to hook them. This is Force of Will. If you hook them, you're putting their stones back.
Sure,
and that's not good. That's not a good experience for players.
It can be very.
Don't hook them, mic them.
It can be very satisfying to lose. It can be very satisfying to lose when you realize that this new player has enjoyed themselves and you've planted something there that is going to come into a new person. And so that is an important...
Actually, I have a story about that.
Yeah, go for it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this happened to me years ago. So like, especially like if you're like if you got a lot of teenagers coming into your store, this story happened to me when I was playing a different card game, which we won't mention, but I brought in said card game, said deck from said card game, and it was remarkably similar to a certain card game's pointy-haired protagonist. And this other player was like playing a much better deck, but definitely entertained me the whole time. And I ended up winning, and I was hooked for like 10, 11 years. And I only went back because FOW came out, and I had Kaijudo too, but we're talking about FOW. It's the exact same thing with any card game. If you can get someone who comes in and you play them with a deck that is going to challenge them but not break them, that's the sweet spot. That will hook them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so...
Or mic them. Sorry, we're miking
Yeah, we're miking them. So, you know, again, that's something that you have to be prepared for. That is not something that you are going to just feel comfortable being able to do right off the bat. So again, if you want to build the locals, these are kind of the steps that you are going to want to need to take. There's a couple other like player element kind of things that I want to talk about, but I do want to talk about the idea of a store. In terms of finding a place to play, and like what you can do there. Matt Seymour is a wonderful example of the fact that he just got a store to sign on to buying product and supporting them. This man has a 30-man locals, like before a store would even willing to do that. But it started
in Newfoundland.
But this man started by just having some friends go together to a card shop that was at least willing to let them play there. And so I think that's one of the things that people don't recognize is that like just because a store isn't necessarily on board to buy the product doesn't mean that that's a store that you should just walk away from, because you need a location to play. And a lot of stores, as long as you're communicative with them saying, hey, on Wednesday nights, if we bring in a crowd to play Force of Will, is that okay? So, I mean, you will probably find a place that's at least willing to try. And as we've talked about before, the biggest thing holding Force of Will back right now is exposure. Just play the game. Like, find a place to play the game, and you won't be surprised at how quickly people are like, what's going on here? What are people playing? What's going on? And so finding a store that's at least willing to let you play there is a good start. And then it's important enough to be communicative with that store. The second step is to ask the store, once you've kind of established yourself, is ask the store to let you run demo days or open houses or things like that. And if you can't get your store to be able to get promos, which we have a video about becoming an official Force of Will store that you should check out or like pass along to a store owner. If you can't get your store Force of Will promos, maybe be willing to sacrifice some of your stuff. You would be surprised at how much the idea of, I've done this so many times, Paul can attest to this, how it always works well, is we've had a new player walk in with a basic starting deck, or they buy a starter deck, or they're super interested in something, and they'll sit down and play a starter version of it, and then we'll get done. And when we're done with the game, I'll ask them like, hey, did you have fun with that deck? Is that something that you're interested in? Or is there something else you're maybe interested in trying? And they'll say something, and I will pull out my trade binder and throw cards at them. Like low shiny things that like are probably just going to sit there for a bit, but ultimately really could just belong and do better in someone else's hand. Things like that make memorable experiences to players, and they will put them in those decks that they're working on, and they will come back. Because you've shown them also that this is a community that's willing to support them and help them, not try to take advantage of them, which can be a big turnoff to some people. Like, people don't always think about card game communities being supportive and engaging and sacrificial. They think of them as being manipulative and abusive, or people to take advantage of.
It's true.
So
I wonder what game that's about.
Every one of the big three. I don't think you're
A pointy-haired protagonist card game.
So that's something to consider. Obviously, if a store can get on it, great. But it can take a little bit of time for a store to be able to get those promos and stuff. But creating a space where people feel supported and encouraged and given the resources to explore without having to purely connect that to money can be really, really helpful. The other thing is be perfect. Talk to your locals about the idea of proxies. Like,
yeah, it's locals.
Who cares?
It's fun.
Yeah. So, that's something to be considerate of too. And also like make people aware of that, right? Of like, hey, it's locals. If you got some proxies, we don't care. That's fine. The other thing is too, if you do hold tournaments, our Odyssey games, we do tournaments and I change decks every round. And we don't care. Because I change decks based on who I'm playing against. If I'm playing against a competitive player, I play a competitive deck. I'm playing
Jeremy, can you just go into Odyssey one day with like, do you remember in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX where Bastion had that like the sacks of cards?
Yeah,
they popped open the pockets, pulled one out. Please go to your next one with that.
my Super Hive is pretty much that.
There you go.
But like, there are things that you can implement at a local level in terms of organizational structure, event structure, and everything else to make them not we said this before, right? In our Magic the Gathering to Forcible video, a community that competes rather than a competing community. There are things that you can do in the internal structure in terms of open houses, being comfortable letting people just pick out some cards from your trade binder, encouraging, competitive level deck swapping as needed based on the person, allowing proxies. There are things that you can do to foster that environment. And if people see that is the foundation of your environment, it will attract players. Word of mouth will spread. Someone will bring someone else will bring someone, and you will have yourself with a group of people who are coming for the experience of being part of a community rather than coming to compete. And when that is the foundation, you just have a healthier space that's more fostering and growth. Matt, in the comments, you can share your perspective too, because it's been, from what I've heard from you, that's literally been the source of your success. It's just creating a place where it's about engagement and fun rather than where you're also competing rather than competing. Locals could be a gym leader. Yeah, it's pretty much everything.
A little more verbose than that, but it kind of boils down to it. Be a rival. Be a rival to everybody coming in. Be a teacher and a rival. Teacher first, rival second.
Yes, for sure. So,
I was also gonna say I've gotten packs and I have the whole set, right? Because I work for this channel, so I just literally say, "Do you need this?" Right? Like somebody wanted a spare Faria that I packed in one of my winning packs, and he said there was a guy. He just said, "Do you want to trade?" And I'm like, "I don't have any trades." And he's like, "Well, I want the Faria." I'm like, "Okay, let me see your stuff." And I didn't see anything at first, but then like as he kept coming back to locals, he's like, "I really want to get that Faria. I really want to get it," because he knew that I had it and he knew that I was willing to trade it. actually having trades is not bad in this game. Especially if you already have all your cards, being willing to trade your cards out if people want to trade, or just handing them out for free. I don't need another Hado 13 anti-magic cancel the thing because I already have 5 of them.
The
So
number
just
of
hand them out.
The number of times that I have had the reaction of someone being taken away at me handing them like 6 full arts out of my trade binder and just being like, here you go. They're like, can I just have these? I'm like, yeah. Y'all good. They're just like, oh my gosh. And then that person comes back next week like clockwork. And it's like, I put those cards you gave me into this deck. I'm really excited. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Like, I can't wait. You know, you have to match. Do you have any words of advice for talking to your locals that got burned by Forcible back in Millennia of Ages? That was 5 years ago. That's my word of advice.
Also a different company. That's another thing entirely.
Yeah.
Company 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? Because that was 2015.
Yeah, 6 years.
Yeah.
Ago. So
6 years ago.
Brednon, to be more serious, I think the biggest thing to tell people is that change of company is big, and the fact that point to the consistency of this game and point to the design of boxes and sets to this game, and how over the past 2 years box value at a sealed level, as Mike vanishes from existence, has become consistent at a positive rate and is like not printed in such a way to even allow something like Millennia of Ages to happen again. We haven't even ever come close to anything like MOA in terms of pure design structure ever since then. It was a one-time mistake, and they have had banger after banger after banger of set design spaces that have proven that a store can make profit on selling the product, and that players will buy it. It
was also the game's first year in international release, which is a huge thing, honestly. It was the game's first year in the States. There's bound to be mistakes. Like, if anybody's going to say, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic, Pokemon, if anybody's going to say that those games didn't fall into pitfalls early on, even more so than the pitfalls they're falling into now.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I can tell people in terms of like what's a miking, a baiting that you can do for a store to convince them is point them towards YY Card World or their distributor. Tell them, come up with a group of people together who say, hey, we will go in and buy a case if you will buy it. Commit to that store. Say, if you buy a case, we will buy it from you. Because then what that store does, what that tells to a store, if you're committed to it, will say, I will buy a case and a half. Because I have this group of 4 who's willing to buy this, which means they're probably committed and want to play, which means they might want more cards later, so I'll make a minimal investment to show that I've bought it, right? And then keep coming back to them. We push Odyssey here on the store. They are the channel sponsor, 100%. We also say that if your locals is buying FOW, buy FOW from your local. Like, that is super important. Be communicative with them about your commitment to the product and to the store, and that will give them the confidence to take a stab at it without getting burned. A safe bet is the easiest way to convince a store that it's worth trying again. Pretty much that is my biggest advice. Yeah, Babatunde makes a good point too. Being a liaison and you're trying to create a community that's a community that competes versus a competing the community, talk to your spikes. If you notice that there's a spike in your community, just have a chat with them. Most players in Force of Will are understanding of that, and understanding of like, look, I get that you want to be competitive, 100%. Just again, be comfortable with swapping decks between rounds, right? You're creating an environment where it's not about the tournament, it's about enjoyment. And so if your locals is fine with people swapping based on the people they're playing against, then the spike players feel fine too, right? Because then they'll play their spiky deck when their opponent is competitive, but they can get that grab in. but then you establish the norm of like, hey, if you're playing against a new person, like you got to play your chill deck. And then they understand, right? Because they've been communicated to, and they understand that that's the environment, and so they themselves will adapt to it as well. Like, communication is super key. And as a player advocate, as a game advocate, you have more influence in that than you think, provided you're being an advocate, not being a player. Because again, different roles. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Discord communities, great. Yeah, we have the Ruler School Discord's been popping off, man. We get like 3 to 4 new people a day, and I'm like, yes, let's go. Considering how a year ago it was like dead. Now it's really to be honest, of my own fault, because I never really pushed it. So we've got
shows what happens when you put some effort into this game.
Exactly,
right?
It shows what happens when you put practice what you preach.
It all comes full circle. Ooh.
We've done it.
It goes in circles and circles and circles and circles. Monkey climb.
Okay, stop.
Because I'm at Seal 7, I'm just gonna cancel.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Perfect.
canceled.
Thank you. So here's the one thing that I want to point out too. Is talking about again, to kind of go back to this idea of being a player versus being an advocate. We talked about it before about how in your individual game space, your goal is different when you're serving as an advocate. It is also understanding that the challenge you face as a game advocate for a tier 2 game is different than the challenge you face being like an advocate for the big 3. Because you are naturally advocating for a game that is harder to acquire unless it's already established. Stereotypically more niche, and people haven't heard about it, so it doesn't have the automatic hook, right? When you go into a game store, you see Magic Pokemon Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic Pokemon Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic Pokemon Yu-Gi-Oh, right? People don't question what those are. You don't have to like tell someone that those games exist. People know them, right? So you naturally have a second hurdle there of you have to now show people that your game exists. And as such, being a tier 2 game, the resources that the company provides are naturally more limited than a big 3 game. So it is important to recognize that hurdle and push through with understanding that you have a significant amount of responsibility and what is it? Not just responsibility, but it's not just responsibility. I'm gonna think of the word.
I see the gears turning. I smell the wood burning right now.
Like there are obligations. Thank you. That's exactly it. You have more obligations in terms of what you need to be doing as an advocate to build a locals than you would if you were just a Yu-Gi-Oh player or a Magic player or a Pokemon player. And it can sometimes feel like, well, that shouldn't be my job. You have to get rid of that mindset if you want to be an advocate for this game. Any tier 2 game, to be perfectly honest. Not just Force Will. Any
the amount of I've got a friend who's an ex-Force Will player, got out around Lapis Cluster after, getting married, having kids, yada yada yada, doing all the adult things. While I'm over here just, slinging cardboard. But he recently got into the Flesh and Blood TCG, and the amount of work he's been putting into building the locals that he's had for that game specifically, supporting me for it too. And I'm like, I'll give it a shot, man, of course. So, like, you're a friend of mine. You're putting a lot of effort into this. You clearly like this game. You've shown me that you like this game. If I don't give you the time of day for it, then what's the point? That's the kind of gall. That's the kind of just energy you need to put into this game. Because whether you're playing Force Will, Digimon, Flesh and Blood, other games that are the big 3, the amount of energy, the amount of focus that you put the game, and the amount of yourself that you throw into it is gonna sell it. That's absolutely the big thing.
Yep.
Be a salesman.
It's that thing where like, you have to recognize that as much as in an ideal world, in the world of the big three that people are used to, the big three sell themselves.
Yep.
Because they're the big three, right? As such, it doesn't feel like you need a Yu-Gi-Oh advocate. It doesn't feel like you need a Pokemon advocate. It doesn't feel like you need a Magic advocate, because those games are literally going to sell themselves. For any tier 2 game, that just isn't possible. Like, by structural size, design, environment of the trading card game world, tier 2 games can't be that.
If you want a good example of, I just want to say, like, if you need a good example of how second tier TCGs can't sell themselves, look at Digimon's IP. Look at Dragon Ball's IP. These are tier 2 games with incredibly well recognized and diverse and well loved and just long standing IPs. They go back to the 90s, the 80s in Dragon Ball's case. And it's just like, if those can't break into the top 3, what chance does a game with original characters have? Original in big quotes, because we also just kind of rip off lore from 8 billion different things. But
I mean, the entirety of Dante's Inferno at this point.
But yeah, so that's it's kind of the thing. It's just like,
public domain.
We do not have the recognizable nature that these other games have, that already can't stand on their own 2 legs without some kind of advocate for them.
And so it feels, we have had this happen. We have had forcible YouTubers, we have had forcible community members, people who have said, with all the, they have said, we've tried to build a community, but it's not my job. The company isn't doing enough. That is a legitimate argument if you were the big three. It's more of that's more of a position of a struggle to recognize the natural limitation and step up to the plate, understanding what stepping up to the plate means. And not everyone is cut out to be a game advocate. I'm not saying that everyone here, whoever plays this game, needs to abandon, playing their hyper-competitive deck, needs to go talk to their LGS, needs to have their, right? I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to say that. What I'm trying to say is that if you want to be that person, you have to recognize what that means, not from a perspective of you've been betrayed, but just from a perspective of that is what reality is. And you set your expectations up to better reflect what the reality of that is going to be. And you have success. You have absolute success when you have that shift. We started Odyssey locals at 6 mans, right?
Oh gosh, back when they still had, when they were in their first store.
Yeah.
During Alice Cluster.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were 6 to 8 of us.
Yeah, 6.
That would do the pre-release.
6 mans.
That was Doc's back in Delaware.
Yeah.
Represent exactly. The OGs.
But we kept playing, because we enjoyed it and we advocated for it, knowing that it was going to be a grind, but we weren't disheartened by the fact that we were doing 6 to 7 to 8 mans, because we were having such a good time and knowing that the work that we were doing was setting the foundations up, right? And now we're expecting at our locals this Wednesday 15 people for the first time, 14 to 15 people to come back, not to mention all the people that we haven't personally connected with on Facebook that Odyssey has been telling us has been buying product throughout the pandemic, right? We laid that foundation and built that relationship with Odyssey by understanding that we were committing to putting in the effort on something that if we were the big 3 gamers, we would be like, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't need to. And so I haven't been burned out by it because I knew this is what I was getting into. And I was fine with that. And I think that we've seen people who aren't fine with that, which is okay, but then they try to do it anyway. And that almost kind of does more harm than good because you burn yourself out and you walk away.
and you
Yeah.
take everyone else with you.
Yep.
So the thing, not everyone is meant to be a community builder, but everyone can contribute to building community. So even if you just go to your locals and you cash in your $5 and you try and get into the top cut and you try and take home some pay, just be a good community member. Like, just treat players well.
Yeah.
If people want to know stuff about your deck, be kind to them. I know. I mean, I know we pick on Yu-Gi-Oh a little bit just because Yu-Gi-Oh has burned us in the past, but I know several really good people in the Yu-Gi-Oh community who have built new Yu-Gi-Oh players because they've just been kind to them, and that's kind of a rarity in that space. Same thing with Magic.
Swinkunis.
Magic players
coming
can
for you.
certainly burn
I'm coming
other
for
people.
you, Swinkunis.
Draconis.
I'm gonna get Swinkunis.
Swinkunis?
I'm gonna get him.
I was like, Draconis. Like, what are
No.
we doing?
No,
Game of
I'm
Thrones cameo
I'm
here?
gonna get Swinkunis from
Swinkunis
the
is
Yu-Gi-Oh
coming.
community.
Um,
I'm gonna get him. I'm gonna get that guy.
yeah, I mean, I don't hear this about Pokemon like at all, and I think that's because like Pokemon definitely is like a little bit more of a friendlier community as a whole IP. But I definitely hear it about Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh players, and those people who have been kind in those spaces have brought people into the game. It doesn't have to be any different from us. Just be good people.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a concept.
Cool.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. Is like there's like three kind of positions that you can find yourself in. I think when working on this idea of building a locals or in contributing to the local environment. Right? There's just a player. You can be just a player. You can be a player who purposely like composes yourself and carries yourself in a way that rewards the experience of others. Which is just like being a good person, right? That's that idea of like being intentional about being a good person. And then there's the advocate level where like you're making choices that kind of purposely go against necessarily your own quote unquote best interest for the sake of investing in the community. And all three of those are important. But it's important to know which of those you feel most comfortable in and which of those you're willing to do. And stick to that. Because again, the thing that we have seen so often from so many communities is that a member tries to be one of those three that they're not comfortable with, and then they push themselves too hard on it, and then it burns them out, and they leave, and there's a fallout with them. And Force of Will right now, we're seeing steady, consistent, slow growth. And that will continue to carry on. The biggest thing that Force of Will needs to avoid right now is fallouts. If Force of Will can enter a place locally, and as it spreads on and spreads on and spreads on, that the fallouts stop happening, we will see continued success, and it will start to get exponentially bigger over time. That is a long time, right? And we're not like saying we've got to double overnight or anything else. We set our expectations up appropriately. But the more you avoid fallouts, the more you will see even better progression overall. Like again, like Matt said, started with 4 in the span of 6 months is up to 24. Right?
Pretty good ROI.
Because
That's 4 players a month.
Yeah.
That's really good.
I
would also say that's kind of like the dream, right? Like
right.
that. Like I didn't realize Matt started 6 months ago.
He's been around for a little bit longer,
amazing.
but his locals was not. I mean, maybe Matt will correct me, but it certainly hasn't been like a ton of time. They started at the beginning of, right near the beginning of Saga Cluster, so maybe closer to maybe like 8 months ago. But like again, not super long.
Also, I would imagine like there's definitely a lot of creative ways that you can like get the hype for the game sort of rolling, especially with all of these new rulers that we actually have the text for. Spoiler season's about to hit. I'm just waiting. I'm praying and I'm waiting for spoilers to start dropping. And my God, like if you just say, "Oh my God, have you seen the new cards?" and like you just get
Look
people
at
to talk about that stuff
Carlina!
out
Look
loud,
at
like
Mighty
actually talk about the
Lady!
game. Carlina, I can play big boys. Oh my God, I'm so excited. Like just do that, and people will naturally just hear that and pick that up. Like,
Yeah.
oh, they're hype about something.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's just tons of ways you can make it amazing. Do a draft.
Build a
If
cube.
people don't have decks,
Play
do
cube
a
at your
draft.
locals.
Cube.
Yeah.
And like I said, you know, it's a King Kong. Just proxy stuff.
Yeah.
If you're really starting out, proxy
It's
stuff.
really hard to proxy things when you're like fighting airplanes off the top of the Empire State Building, but I feel like you can manage it. It'll be a great time, and I highly recommend it.
Okay. Been playing
Just
since
yell at them,
Grim.
do you want to come to my locals?
Oh, yeah.
And in Saga Cluster, we used the year previous to rethink how to approach that. Exactly. That shift of how to over the span of the past year, shifting how you approach locals and everything else. Yep.
Yeah.
Good stuff. It's proof that it can happen, right? It's proof that it exists. And I think that's, yeah, absolutely. Like I've had Matt's comment has been such a great feeling. I've had conversations with Matt about the effort that he's put in and like how his approach to locals has been that of the game advocate. And Matt is such a person that being in that role and making those decisions has been
That's just a good
incredibly
boy,
rewarding,
man.
right? So it can be incredibly rewarding. And I think that that's the thing that I want to kind of end this on is that like if you're willing to step into that advocate role and do the things that kind of we've talked about and set your expectations up appropriately and like really think that that's the spot for you, like it is phenomenal to see a group of 16 people that aren't you play Force of Will in a space that you started with 4. To see the growth, to see the faces, to see the hype games, to in between rounds at locals talk about the ridiculous plays, like, and to know that what you're doing created that is incredibly rewarding. So keep it up. That's what we gotta say, or get started.
Kiki's in the chat for Matt, by the way.
Kiki's in the chat for Matt.
Kiki's in the chat.
Kiki's in the chat.
Let's go to the. Where's my mouse?
In the chat.
Kiki's in the chat.
Kiki's in the chat for Matt. Kiki's in the chat for Matt. Yeah, Roderick, the feeling of growth is a great feeling for sure. Roderick, how is Texas? Texas doing okay? I know there's been some pretty active Force of Will Discord members talking about how the scene in Texas is starting to really get kicking again.
Boy, howdy.
And like,
Yeah.
just gonna
Everything's bigger in Texas, including the community.
So yeah, there's lots of stuff to be able to do there, and you know the hope of office hours as well as teachers lounge and just everything we do here on the channel is designed to serve as a support for you as an advocate. You know, we try to be available to answer questions. Very plugged into the community. I've literally been doing this since Grim Cluster started.
Jeremy, real quick, I
He
feel like I know he didn't donate for them, but Matt's such a good community boy.
The gloves
and
are packed away for Wednesday. I'm sorry, I can't put them on. No gloves.
Naked hands.
Naked hands.
Use the power of your imagination to put the gloves on Jeremy, and then use that imagination to build your locals.
Perfect. So, Arlington is in the game now. Excellent. Good to hear that, Roderick. Dope.
Yes.
So, yeah, we try to be a resource for you guys. Go back and watch the streams. I do want to say that with this week, we are very excited to be able to start
free range pumpkin.
I like it.
Woo!
We're starting to do feature matches with commentary and deck profile videos again. Since now we are transitioning, I do want to say that starting this week, we will also be starting. I don't have the gloves, Matt. I don't have them. They are packed
Go
away.
get them. Get them.
I'm not.
He donated. Go get them.
I'll put on one of them.
Okay. If you're doing one of them, you might as well do
Damn.
both.
No, because the other one's packed away. This one's still on the table.
quickly, someone quickly donate $5 to get the other one.
Stop this. Anyway, let me finish what I'm trying to say here. Jeez Louise.
Make him
So
by throwing
you're gonna
money
be
at him.
starting this week. If you are a channel member, you will be able to get access to our weekly videos a day early. Our feature match for this week will be posted tomorrow for members. That also means that on Wednesday, you will get to see our tutoring session video, which will not be released to the public until Thursday. We're also doing 2 deck profile videos this week, which will then be released on Thursday and Friday instead of Friday and Saturday. It's again an encouragement for you to join members if you want to get access to videos a day early. But regardless, you can still tune in just to kind of give you a heads up for this week. Wednesday will be the regular feature match at noon, and then our casual Foul Wednesday stream will actually be streamed from our locals as we kind of hang out and have a good time while we're getting a feature match recorded and all that stuff. So still tune in for that. We just won't be as interactive with the chat just because of the way we're streaming it. And then Thursday, we'll have our new tutoring session video series, which what we're going to do is an hour-long match with discussion of play lines and considerations and backtracking and everything else of the Violet versus Feathsing Moodstart competitive lists with one of our channel members, our faculty member, Diva Dan, helping us out with that. Very excited for that video. And then on Friday and Saturday, you will have the deck profiles from this week's feature match, which is Saga updated Dark Alice versus Dolly Faria, which is a very fun list that I think you will enjoy. So we'll be tuning in for that. But I do want to say thank you all so much for this wonderful stream. That you guys great questions, and we're happy that we have been happy to have been able to be a resource for you. And wish you luck as you continue to build your locals. So until next time, this has been myself, Demo73, and I have been joined, as always, by the lovely Paul Reitman.
Kiki Bezos. That's been going on in my head for at least 15 minutes. Watch Inside by Bo Winner. It's great. Watch it.
The beautiful Mike Rance.
You think a pirate's favorite letter would be R, but actually it's always going to be his first love is the C.
And until next time, class dismissed. Have a good night, everybody.
Yarr.